Hello again. I sometimes have difficulty working out whether or not people who claim to welcome immigration and find it beneficial to the country really believe this, or if they are simply repeating some mantra which they've been taught, just parroting unthinkingly an utterly mad and patently ridiculous statement which nobody in his or her senses could possibly subscribe to. I shall talk about London, for that is the epicentre of immigration to this country, and the ill effects that we see in the capital are gradually spreading out like ripples from a stone tossed in a pond, until eventually all parts of Britain will feel the effects. I met somebody at London's Victoria railway station yesterday, and as I made my way across the concourse, found that I had to walk around a very long queue of women. What were they queuing for, do you suppose? The lavatory. The queue stretched from underground all the way up the steps and for 20 yards or so across the concourse. Why do you think that might have been? Is there an outbreak of dysentery in that part of London, perhaps, necessitating extra facilities so that the usual number of public lavatories is suddenly insufficient? No, not a bit of it, because it was exactly the same a month ago when I last was there. Here's the thing, though. This wasn't the case 30 years ago. The facilities in the early 1990s were quite sufficient, and there were no queues of this kind at all, ever. This little cameo illustrates perfectly the problems which large-scale and wholly unrestricted immigration have brought to the country. You see, in 1981, the population of London was 6.7 million. It had been falling since the end of the Second World War, and there was plenty of room in London, and all the various services in the capital, the buses and trains, the public lavatories, the shops, doctors, surgeries and schools and all the rest of it, were easy to access with no queues or waiting lists. Anybody over the age of 50 knows this perfectly well, of course. Since that time, the population of London has risen by 3 million and is now officially 9.7 million, although in reality it's almost certainly much higher than that. In other words, since those days when there was plenty of room to breathe and few problems on the tube and no difficulty in finding a dentist or getting to see a doctor, the population has risen by roughly 50%. Of course, there are not 50% more tube stations, or 50% more schools, or 50% more hospitals, dentists and public lavatories, are there? Nor are there 50% more shops or 50% more pavements. What this means is that all those things are going to be much more crowded than they were before. The public lavatories at Victoria Station were perfectly adequate for 100 years or so, from Queen Victoria's time all the way throughout the whole of the 20th century. Now they are almost impossible to access, and women have to queue for them as though they are waiting for the Boxing Day sales to begin. This is a direct result of cramming an extra 3 million people into London. This is not a natural increase, that is to say, more babies being born than people dying. The increase is entirely due to immigration. As I say, the population of London was falling, and then from the 1990s it began soaring due to immigration. People sometimes ask themselves why there are things like lots of stabbings and so on, which seldom used to be seen in London, and they might like to read up on experiments that have been made with colonies of mice and rats, where horrible overcrowding is allowed to occur. Some of the features noted in these conditions are that savage and pointless attacks on each other become frequent. The rats are stressed by overcrowding and they react with violence. There seems no present prospect of the increase in the rate at which the population of London is rising, there's no prospect of it halting or even slowing down. More and more housing estates and tower blocks are being built, but they simply cannot keep pace with the number of new residents arriving in the capital. The same thing's being seen on a lesser scale elsewhere in Britain, so that other cities and towns are also beginning to feel more crowded and less pleasant to live in than was the case a decade or two back. The thing which I cannot fathom out is this. Anybody over a certain age knows that this is the case. They know that what I am saying is true. Now, there might be some excuse perhaps for teenagers not to realise this because they haven't got that sort of perspective that older people have. They can't imagine London or any other city being different. They simply cannot imagine London not being multi-ethnic and hideously crowded. But for those of us of a certain age, it's easy enough to remember. And yet, there are people my age who deny that this is so. There are people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who try and pretend or claim that they think that immigration has had a wholly beneficial effect on London. And I find that puzzling, frankly. I don't know whether this is something like doublethink, where they are believing something which they know on one level to be untrue and still subscribing to it, or what is going on.